Welcome to the ENAI Wellbeing series.
Good morning and a very warm welcome to the launch of our online series, which is called the Wellbeing series, and it will be focused on well-being and integrity in higher education. My name is Veronika Krásničan, and I am the Executive Director of the European Network for Academic Integrity. And today it is the first of our 5 sessions where we will explore a connection between how we feel and also how we work. For ENAI, this is now a topic priority since the well-being is our topic of the year, and we have learned that we cannot just talk about honesty and rules without taking also the human experience. So when students and staff face really extreme stress or burnout, the foundation of academic integrity is really put in the risk. And we think that by addressing the well-being, we are really protecting the academic integrity and the very heart of the education. This series is a collaboration between ENAI and also Studiosity. And before we begin, I really want to express our sincere gratitude to Evelyn and Andrea from Studiosity, who really contributed to the series and really helped to make this a reality. Today we have 2 guests, 2 important keynotes, and I'm really honored to introduce Professor Judyth Sachs, the Chief Academic Officer for Studiosity. And Judyth is an educator and activist with long history in university leadership, and she is a really powerful voice for creating more supportive academic environments. And we also have her here, Garnet Perry. And Garnet comes from a background of Norvalit, which is now part of the Studiosity family, and he focuses on validation, helping students to prove the authenticity of their work in a way that really builds the confidence rather than just building a fear. So Judyth and Garnet, thank you very much for being here, and I think we can start this important conversation by Judyth Sachs.
Thank you very much, Veronika, and thank you for the invitation to participate in this important podcast. I do want to say that the lens in which I understand and navigate the world is through that of anthropology and sociology. And so everything I do is really is in response to the ethnographic questions: what's happening here, what's really happening here, and what does it mean? And so when we look at particularly issues around AI and AI well-being, there's a lot of information about what's happening here, but for people who are in practice sort of situations and having to live it in their day-to-day living, they have a different perspective of what's really happening here. And they then have to translate that lived experience into what does it mean for me? And in that, what does it mean for me? How do I manage my students? How do I support my students? How do I also provide appropriate interventions both in an institution at the institutional level, but also serve the best interests of students? So that's by way of just a sort of an overview of me. But I usually like to frame my my presentations around questions, and I've got 2 questions that I'm going to focus on today, and one is about risk, and the other one is what's the evidence telling us. And so the risks I'll go through, and the evidence that I'm using is not only my own lived experience of running a university, but also the evidence of some reports that have been undertaken by Studiosity. And these reports, I really encourage you to have a look at them because they are evidence-rich, have implications for practice, and they are really clearly and scholarly presented. So the one in particular that's written by an academic is Rebecca Mace, and I'll talk about this in a minute. And she talks about ethical AI in higher education, boosting learning, retention, and progression. And so her main sort of focus is actually trying to navigate this environment of a low trust culture. What does it mean? What does it really mean? And what have we got to do to build this low trust culture? So let me start off with what are the risks facing universities. So, and this low trust culture is also the sort of at the key level of, there has been an erosion of critical thinking and cognitive skills. And what I also meant to say is in those 7 risks, they are educational. The majority of the risks, I think, are educational. There's one that's technical and technological. There's one that's political, and there's one that's cultural. So let's start with the education ones, first of all, which is the erosion of critical thinking and cognitive skills. Over-reliance can lead students to offload their own thinking, resulting in diminished problem-solving attributes, critical thinking, and creativity. This cognitive offloading means students may produce acceptable work, but fail to develop lasting skills or the ability to evaluate information independently. And I think that in higher education, we are actually, the difference between schooling and higher education is the development and the application of critical thinking and cognitive skills. And in particular, higher order critical thinking skills, such as problem solving, such as synthesis, and others that you know only too well. But I think that lack of critical thinking is probably in response to the other pressures that students are feeling, the sort of time management skills. And in Australia and other parts of the world, students are actually studying full-time and working full-time just to manage the economic challenges that they're having to manage. And that sort of offloading creates the opportunity to think, all right, I've got this to finish, what's the easiest way for me to finish? And it's not that they have a deliberate intention in the main to violate academic integrity. It's actually about the nature of their lives, the fast pace of their lives, and them wanting to have a life as young people. But I'm also very aware that, in fact, not all students are school leavers. There are a lot of students who are what we in Australia call mature age students. And they actually have to manage a completely different set of challenges. Their learning in universities now is very different from when they might have been learning, 15, 20 years ago. That isolation that some students feel in universities also has an impact both on their performance and well-being. And the thing that's also interested me a lot lately is that well-being has become very much inserted into the discourse and lexicon of universities. Whereas many years ago, when I was a young lecturer last century, well-being was just supporting students. But now it's a key feature of both resources, of practices, discourses, but also the values of the university. And of course, we saw the impact of that with COVID and how that had a major impact on student well-being. And we're starting to see the impact of student well-being in our students now. There are many students that I'm hearing that actually prefer to work alone. They prefer to work in isolation. Coming into the classroom is something for some of them. It's quite scary. So this whole well-being is going to have sort of pedagogical implications. It's going to have resource implications and certainly cultural implications. The second key risk is about academic integrity and authenticity. And of course, what's 2 years ago that ChatGPT was launched? And of course, the world was going to end 2 years ago when ChatGPT was launched. And the initial response was a culture of mistrusting students, that students would not act in their own best interest. They would act in the interest of something else. But also that the mistrust was having a mistrust of both the processes in universities and the policies in universities. So in universities, we had to make some dramatic changes, both in policies, to be much more student-focused, to be much more student-supportive, but also to focus on student success and student well-being. And those two elements now around academic integrity are really the fundamental platforms of actually academic integrity. And AI, as we well know, makes it easier for students to generate assignments and essays, raising concerns about plagiarism and the authenticity of student work. Distinguishing human and AI-generated content becomes increasingly difficult, challenging, and assessment models and academic honesty have to be reconfigured. And if I could just divert and tell you a story that I was faced with only last week. I did a major report for a university to develop a curriculum framework. And one of the things I'm known for is work-integrated learning. And in the report, we made some suggestions about having as part of the curriculum at this university and the focus on employability, work-integrated learning. We sent it out for response and discussion across the university, and somebody accused us of plagiarism. So we put a plagiarism check through it. And in fact, I was plagiarizing myself because I forgot to put inverted commas into the text. Well, that was the terrible moral panic by this man that this report was worth nothing. But in fact, it was the omission of two inverted commas to demonstrate that it was a quote from my own work. So I think that sometimes we lose the sort of the focus and the importance of academic integrity and authenticity. And the important thing is we have to be reading and assessing students' work. And we have to think very closely about building trust. And so they realize the absolute imperatives of academic integrity, honesty, and trust, both of themselves, of their teachers, and their peers. And if those become unaligned and they lose their traction, I think the quality of higher education starts to diminish. The quality of a degree certainly starts to diminish. And students, when they graduate and they demonstrate that they actually don't have the skills that they suggest that they have, are really put in a very difficult situation of having a degree that's not worth anything. So academic integrity is both a foundation of university practice. Authenticity, that it's real and it's done by students, is the application of that. And I think it will continue to be part of the taken for granted assumptions of universities, where 5 years ago, 10 years ago, because we had an academic integrity program at Macquarie University when I was provost. But now it's actually really fundamental. There are organizations that talk about academic integrity. There are whole conferences that focus on academic integrity, and it has to be part of a student's toolkit, but also an academic's toolkit. There's also number 3, which is also an education one. There's a whole set of social and emotional implications when students just focus too much on using technology. Their ability to interact with each other starts to diminish. Their ability to have those sort of social skills that are the glue of community and contemporary life start to diminish. And I'm constantly amused when I travel on public transport in Sydney, which is a large international metropolis, that 4 out of 5 people are sitting on the bus looking at their screens. They're either playing a game on their screens, they're looking at Facebook, they're looking at Instagram. And so that sense of being able to recognize the context in which you're operating to make appropriate behavioral considerations about, what's happening here, what's really happening here, and what does it mean, is something that I think that the social and emotional development of individuals in society is really starting to look a little bit different. In universities themselves, relationships are really fundamental for student success, and belonging is also really important. And the work that I used to refer to a lot when I was running a university was the first 6 weeks of a student's experience are absolutely fundamental to their success and their belonging. If they feel isolated, disconnected, and feel that this is not their place because they don't have the cultural capital or they don't have the prior experience to understand the complexities of a university, in that first 6 weeks, if they don't feel they belong, they will leave. And I think for us as educators and teachers, we have to keep a watchful eye on how students are behaving. Do they look isolated in your class? Are you seeing them in your building, just sort of wandering around aimlessly? And I think that we as scholars, academics, but also humans, do have a responsibility to just have a duty of care, to show some kindness, so show some awareness that these students are feeling this as well. So I think that Students support feeling less connected to their teachers and peers, which can impact on their well-being and their sense of belonging, which I've said. The next one is equity and access. We know that the world is not equal. We also know that there are different capitals that students bring to their education. And for many students, those who don't grow up in a family where education is absolutely crucial, where there are no books, there are no stories told about the value of education, where education is actually not seen as being very important. Those students are really at a great disadvantage. And in places like Australia, we have an Indigenous community that in many respects, there are now whole generations that are being successful, but there are previous generations of Indigenous people who were marginalised through education, who did not have access to education, who did not have access to good jobs because they lacked education, and also lacked the cultural capital to navigate social life at a higher level. The other area of equity and access is access to the technology. And so if you live in a home that is impoverished, where you go to university where there's the expectation that you have to use technology both to access information, to submit assignments, to participate in learning through tutorials and the flipped classrooms and things like that. If you are required to go into the university to have access to that, you are disadvantaged in terms of time, you're disadvantaged in terms of the technological information. And so there are now various opportunities for students to have access to technology, but then they also have to have access to the internet. And as you may know, Australia is a pretty large country, and there are whole parts of it that are not well serviced by the internet, and that also creates problems. And if I could just diverge for a moment, 2 weeks ago, I was to have a conversation with the president of an American university for these podcasts that I run on reimagining higher education. The suburb in which I live was totally blacked out. There was not a light on, there was no power in the whole suburb. I was thinking, all right, I can do this if I can hotspot my computer and do it that way. I had one bar. I walked up to the top of the hill. I still only had one bar. And so by this stage, I was starting to feel somewhat anxious and somewhat thinking, well, this is what the world will be like if we have a major technological failure. So needless to say, I did manage to get it up to 2 bars. I could send an email and say, we can't go ahead because we've got a catastrophic blackout in the suburb. Anyway, I'm now talking to this person tomorrow, but that sense of the dependence that we have on technology in all aspects of our life. And just think when you lose your phone, your whole life is on your phone. And so that disruption and that sort of dependence on technology in an environment where you might not have easy access and equity to the technology is also somewhat of a problem. Data privacy and security, which is the technological one, is certainly one that, and Garnet knows this through the work he's been doing with Studiosity just recently. It involves collecting and processing large amounts of student data, and it raises concerns about privacy, consent, and potential misuse of sensitive information. So this is another area, the area of privacy. In any conversation we have with a university, it is about privacy. It is about the robustness of the technology, but it's also about what happens if information is hacked. And every day here we hear of some vile creature that's hacked some important infrastructure in Australia. So that sense of also being on edge about data privacy and security. But we are now absolutely dependent on data when we are working with students and trying to understand student performance. We need to have good, robust and defensible data to make judgments about, oh, gee, students aren't understanding this, or perhaps we need to readjust the curriculum because it's really clear that this group of students really understand that. So we need to make them develop and operate at a higher level. So that sense of privacy and security is really front of mind to senior people in universities. The next one is academic standards and assessment. I think one of the things that one of the great disruptors, and it's still being navigated and managed, is that of assessment. And it seems to me that this has given us the opportunity to rethink the purpose of assessment, how we assess, why we assess, and what we're going to do with that information. And sadly, I think that there is a little bit of slowness in institutions to actually rethink, why are we assessing? What are we assessing? And what do we want to learn from the information we get? And it will require, and this goes back to, all of these key risks are interrelated. This goes back to the lack of trust. Can we actually trust that this piece of assessment tests and measures what a student knows and understands? So assessment should be about learning as well as performance, and then how you use that information to actually feel confident that you have been successful as a teacher, but students have been successful in understanding and applying that. And then, of course, the standards are really provide a scaffolding around every aspect of university life. So there are academic standards, there are research standards, there are teaching standards, there are curriculum standards, but they need to be connected, interrelated, and have some currency amongst students, but also have some currency and use amongst academics. But at the end of the day, they're about building trust in people and processes and the learning that happens. And then the final one, and we've seen some issues where there have been major cases of ghostwriting, buying an essay, and then new ways of using ChatGPT. Institutional reputation and trust can be seriously compromised if it's become apparent that there are problems in the system in ensuring that that standards and quality and integrity are not aligned, let alone practiced, and let alone applied. Can I have the next slide, please? Now, there are two reports that we've used, and they're both Studiosity reports. The Higher Education Student Wellbeing 2026 report, researched by YouGov. This has thousands of students. And so if you can get hold of it, it's got lots of information. It's disaggregated by country, but it's also disaggregated by themes. But one of the big, two big messages, two big issues are around students are stressed, and so are educators. And the Wellbeing survey said that 77% of students fear being wrongly flagged. And there was also a new report by the Brookings Institution that I also would encourage you to have a look at, where students are actually feeling stressed because of the stresses on their lives. But educators are also stressed. Trying to catch students using AI is a lost cause, says a Singapore University professor. And so the response by somebody in Missouri was, I keep incredibly tedious timestamped notes just to justify my work. And so that sense of not only the workload that creates, but also the level of anxiety that it creates for students. So let's actually now move down past the student wellbeing survey that I mentioned, and then down to the next one. So let me just present a couple of things that are indicated in that survey. So there's certainly a learning, high AI use, but low learning confidence. And that's actually an interesting point. I'm using AI, but I don't feel confident that I'm learning anything. 81% use AI to complete HE studies. So a lot of students are doing that. And 63% of those, 63% use it for learning, and 37% use it because of speed. I think it's really important for us to ask ourselves, why are students doing this? And part of it is they're being time poor. So the highest, going through some of the high level things in that report, the highest adoption is in Malaysia, which is 97% using AI, and UAE is 95%. The lowest adoption is in the United Kingdom, and that's 71%. Frequency, Malaysia leads with 50% regular use. Expectations, Saudi Arabia and Singapore, 70 and 71, or 71 and 70, feel their universities are adapting fast enough with ethical guidance. But the UK leads with the leads with that. So I guess that the global report also says, when asked what they use it for, to help me learn and to get it faster, 37% said the latter. So if we move on in terms of another one, and this is about only 4 in 10 students, 41%, which is up from 2025, feel the next slide. Excellent, thank you. So only 4 in 10 students feel very or extremely confident that they're learning while using AI tools. So I think that that's actually telling us quite a bit about, they're not feeling that they're learning. The next slide, please. Around 2/3, 65%, of students report some level while using AI tools in their study. And it's interesting that it's only a small number, 4%, that feel a lot of stress, but 35% that said that there's no stress. And it would be interesting to interrogate that a bit more, just to know what's actually happening. So the next slide, please. Now, we started at the very beginning of this conversation about students being stressed about being wrongly flagged by AI detection tools. And I told you my story about being wrongly flagged by an AI detection tool. But if we look at that, the orange ones are sort of really pretty much consistent through all these areas. And so it's slightly or moderately, but still a sizable number not feeling stressed at all. The next one, please. Now, this is the report that I mentioned to you that's really worthwhile looking at, and I think that it's a really it's a scholarly piece of work. It's certainly evidence-based, and at the very beginning of the report, there's a comment made by one of the members of the UK Academic Advisory Board, and she says, the findings of this report, which draw on a mixed data from students and staff across various universities, confirm what many of us have suspected. When deployed with intention, AI for learning can significantly support student academic success, particularly those from non-traditional or disadvantaged backgrounds. This research highlights the significant potential of AI's pedagogical role. So I think that the approach is that AI acts as a learning partner to prompt reflection and support skill development. It's a model for how we can embed technology for learning gain. And I think that embedding technology for learning gain is absolutely fundamental. Next slide, please. So this is from the report. Ultimately, this lack of alignment between staff perceptions and student intentions highlights the pressing need for clear and consistent institutional guidance. There are multiple conversations taking place, with all groups talking cross purposes. Without alignment, a culture of mistrust may become fully entrenched, and well-meaning students will operate in silence, and staff will interpret this silence as evidence of deliberate misconduct. I think that's really quite a telling quote, and one that's quite worrying about what do you do? And I guess the first thing is to have really clear guidelines about what is expected of students, what students can expect of academics, what academics can expect of students, and what both parties can expect of the institution in terms of how particularly issues around academic integrity are developed and played out. Next one, please. There's another one. There also remains a troubling digital literacy divide. The students who use AI in basic or clumsy ways, often because they're unfamiliar with the technology, are the ones most likely to be caught by detection tools and referred to for academic misconduct. So in fact, a little bit like my story of forgetting to put in the inverted commas and being accused of plagiarism of my own work, students who actually have troubling low digital literacy skills are the ones that are most likely to be caught. And so the key findings of the independent research by Rebecca are here. There's a direct correlation between formative AI support and student persistence in one cohort. High use students saw a 95% retention rate versus 82.8% for low users, suggesting that timely ethical support reduces the panic-induced misconduct lists. Really important point. Second point, closing the hidden curriculum gap. The research shows that the fastest gains in lower performing and less confident cohorts. This intersection is critical by scaffolding support. AI helps students master academic standards, reducing the incentive to shortcut due to lack of belonging. And then finally, the iterative threshold for skill acquisition. Academic standards become internalized by students at approximately 6 submissions. This highlights that integrity is a learned skill facilitated by repetitive feedback rather than a fixed character trait. Really important things. Students have to learn, and they learn by doing, and by learning by doing, it has a major impact both on their performance and their practice. And then there are 2 other key findings: combating AI guilt and vulnerability to AI literacy. Well, we've talked about both of those briefly. I've gone over my 20 minutes, and I apologize to Garnet. So Garnet, I'm going to flick the football to you and let you talk about your area.
Thanks, Judyth. Yeah, some really important findings there, some important research for people to go and investigate further. We thought it would be useful to kind of then reflect on what was just presented there and try and look at some options of a way forward. What can we do with some of this information, and what are some things that we can do in practice? So I'm going to talk a little bit about student accountability, but in a try and present a new way forward, and look at how we can potentially change the relationship between the institution and the student with that thought around student accountability, but also the wellness lens on this. And so this slide was presented by Judyth earlier, but I think it's really important to kind of reframe on my side the kind of the current situation of the stress inside of education right now, where students are really feeling the stress of potentially being accused of misconduct when they haven't done anything wrong, or it could be more general, where they know AI is there, but in some cases they're afraid to engage with it because they don't want to. They're not sure of how to use it appropriately. When we talk about wellness, we don't just talk about students. There's also the educators, the instructors are also feeling stress because there's this. With the new technology, anytime an instructor is looking at a paper to grade, there's this thought of, how do I distinguish what is authentic student work and what is not written by the student, or what is potentially written by AI or someone else. And so we know this is taking a lot of time and effort out of the instructors, the educators' day, and yeah, I think it's just important to kind of identify those concerns. We believe that the police and punish approach is broken, where students are, detected for cheating or malpractice, or in recent times, a lot of the solutions that we're seeing in the market are very surveillance heavy, where they're tracking every keystroke of the student, and we don't believe that that's an appropriate way to solve the problem. And you can imagine from a student's perspective, and especially as we look at well-being, nobody really likes to have somebody look over their shoulder as they're kind of trying to be creative and thinking in the learning process. And so some things, the key thing that we think that's important in this process is student agency. Students having control over their own learning process, giving them the ability to learn and go and research and find the information they want and write it down and go through the learning process, how and when and where they want to, not kind of locked into a specific solution where you have to write everything and it's being monitored. And the other key thing here is, do these solutions, the police and punish solutions, do they focus on learning, or are they just trying to identify malpractice? And we want to try and have a solution that does both of these things: provides student agency, holds students accountable, but also focuses on the key element of education, which is learning. I've been traveling around a lot to conferences, and I picked up the following information from a conference over in the Canadian Symposium of Academic Integrity from Benz and Guilford, a presentation they did. And when they presented, and I've seen this myself talking with lots of institutions, is they look at the solution or the issues around the impact of AI on assessment. And a lot of organizations are looking at, okay, well, there's a lot of pressure on students and the assessment process. So there's a focus on redesigning assessment in a way that's more suitable for both academic integrity, but also engaging students, right? And I think Judyth mentioned this earlier, making sure that assessment is doing the job of assessing the student and the outcomes that are what we're trying to achieve, and making sure that those assessments are authentic and impacting the student's learning process. And we also see that there's a lot of institutions that are looking at the impact of AI and looking at AI literacy. So, really kind of focusing in on educating their students and staff around, what does this mean for academic integrity, the impact of AI, but also more generally AI literacy. What is good practice around the use of AI, and where are those boundaries? And then finally, we have this reducing the opportunity by having some kind of solution in place where we can hold students accountable and in a way secure the assessment. So when we ask students in some cases not to use AI or to maybe only use it in a supportive way, that we can see evidence of that, and we can and when they haven't met the expectation, that we can hold them accountable in a way that is not so punitive. And so the key to this, and the reason why I'm presenting this, is a lot of organizations, and the key question I ask is, where is your organization focusing their strategy? Because often when I speak to organizations, they kind of get locked in to one of these areas, and they feel like that's going to be the way that they're going to solve this issue around AI in assessment. And the reality is, when I've seen some good practice, the best practice is when organizations take all of these elements into consideration, because this is a difficult problem to solve, and it's not a single. There's no magic, silver bullet, so to speak. It's a multi-layered approach where we do need to look at assessment design and improve the way we're assessing students. We do need to educate students on AI literacy and where are the boundaries, what's the best practice of how they can use it in an appropriate way as part of the learning process. And finally, we do need to reduce the opportunity by securing the assessments. We need to have some way of providing evidence to show students when they haven't followed the process that we can hold them accountable. Now, from a Studiosity perspective, we have an approach. You can go to our website, you can see the support and validate model. And the support side of things is where we have a formative writing feedback process targeted at the students' learning process, where when students have got some draft of their report or essay or whatever assignment it is, they can submit it to Studiosity as part of the learning process to get feedback on the students' work. And I'm going to go into a bit more detail on that. But at the same time, when we're doing that process, we want to, if we're giving support and feedback on their writing, we want to make sure that the writing is valid and that it's their work. So that's where we've added in the validate side of the process, which is as Veronika mentioned earlier. I was part of an organization called NorValid, which was a partner to ENAI in the past and presented. NorValid is part of the Studiosity family, and we're rebranding NorValid into the Validate solution. And for those that aren't aware, what Validate does is looks at what the student is submitting as part of their final assessment process, where they submit their work. We instead of looking at what else is in the student's work, looking for other things like text written that the student hasn't written or something written by AI. What we do is we focus on the student's writing and we validate if it's their work. So we look for the student in their own work. And that's why we call the product Validate, because we're validating the student's work. When we take a step back and we look at this solution, we're really trying to focus on this lens of well-being. We're trying to give students agency in their work so they can go and do the work where they want to. They can submit it when they feel like their draft is ready to get some real-time feedback. And then when it comes time to actually submitting their work for grading, we can validate it. But we want to ensure that students have got agency in that process and that they're taking responsibility for their own work. And we believe that this process really engages students in the learning process themselves by submitting and getting that feedback earlier in the learning process, as opposed to waiting for the deadline and going, oh, I'm just going to get my work done last minute and submit it. By engaging them earlier in the process, getting some feedback on their work and seeing some drafting going on, we feel that that's a great way for students to kind of be more engaged in their learning process, so that they're not leaving things to the last minute, and they can build and add iterative feedback and improve their work in that learning process in preparation for the submission. So how does this work in practice? If you consider that the support and validate process are two sides of the student journey, the support process, as I mentioned, is where students can have a draft of their work and submit it for some feedback. Now, you can see here some of the key elements of what we give feedback on. So we look at students' critical thinking. We look at the Bloom's taxonomy. We leverage the Bloom's taxonomy to kind of point students in the right direction. And the key to this is we do not provide the answers, right? We don't give answers to the students. This is based off of 20 years of Studiosity giving quality feedback to students through human feedback over time. And we now have a solution that has been adapted to use AI in this process to give quicker feedback to students in real time. And you can see other elements: structure, language, spelling, grammar, use of sources, task alignment feedback, and we also have the ability for peer connection. The student Studiosity writing feedback is based in pedagogical principles of timely, formative, ethical, and no answer help to build learning capacity. And once the student has kind of got to their draft to a point where they feel confident and is ready to submit, as part of that submission process, what we do is we look at their work and validate validate the student's work. And we look at this. You can see we've got five layers here that we look at this work that the student has submitted. And the first three you can see are blue, which those highlight that we're looking at the text that the student has given us, and we're looking at things like a linguistic identity, where we're comparing the student's work to themselves as a baseline, and we're saying, does this look like it was written by the student or not? Using stylometry and elements of a student's linguistic fingerprint to compare the two pieces of text and see, are these written by the same author? The human check simply looks at the text to see, is this meeting the standard of looking like it was written by a human? And then we have a citation check, which looks at public sources and to see if those are cited or verified appropriate or not. The other two that you can see in orange are question session. So what happens in this process is when the student submits their work, we read their work in real time and we generate unique questions to the student. So the first one, the adaptive quiz, means that we are looking at the student's work and we're creating some open-ended questions to simulate the conversation that any instructor would have with a student, that where they might think that the student, this is not the student's writing. We can ask them questions and say, tell me a little bit more about what you wrote here. And this is what we're doing in this process. We're simulating what any instructor would do in a follow-up with a student. And in a way, it's like a mini Viva, where when somebody has completed their master's thesis, they defend their work and they get asked some questions. And this is the same process here. The closed questions test is where we effectively do fill in the blank. And we've borrowed this methodology from Thomas Fotenac, who is the chair of the European Network of Academic Integrity. He's done some research around this. And there's a strong correlation between a student who has authored their work and gets a sentence where the key word is taken out, and being able to complete that fill in the blank correctly when they have authored that, as opposed to where a student has not authored the sentence and they're simply guessing. So there's a strong correlation between authorship and getting this closed test or fill in the blank correct, and not getting it correct and not having wrote that sentence. And so what you have here is a multi-layered approach where we are trying to, in a positive engagement, support the student in their learning journey, engage early in this practice and get them thinking about their learning, but then also hold them accountable, but in a positive way. So where we look at their writing and their work through the lens of these 5 verification steps that we do, and the outcome here is that if we have validated their work, then there's no problem. Everything is fine. And if there gets to a point where the results in the validation report are not matching up, instead of going, aha, we've caught you, you're a cheater, or you've had misconduct in your work here. What we believe that there's an opportunity to change the way we can engage with students in a way that's much more restorative. So say we validated the work and we don't see enough of the student in their work, and the evidence shows that we haven't. And then we can have a restorative conversation saying, listen, in this assignment, I was very clear that I asked to see your work, and in this scenario, I said that AI was not allowed, and I just didn't see enough of you in your work, and that's what the evidence is showing me. So then we go into the university's normal process of whatever the options are, whether you give students another chance or reduce a percentage off their grade, but it doesn't have to be so punitive in nature. So this element of well-being and supporting students, validating their work, engaging them in an appropriate way, holding them accountable, but in a way that is fair and engaging. And so, just to close off, we believe there's a way to move away from a police and punish model, which we know, and based on the evidence that Judyth presented earlier in this presentation, that there's a lot of stress and concern with students in education right now and educators, right? And as well as with educators on what do they do with these assignments. And we want to present a way forward that is supportive and validating students' work. So we want to provide a way where your students measurably improve their writing and critical thinking over time, protecting the degree while also protecting the essential skills that students need to acquire, not giving students the opportunity to just take the shortcut that AI provides. We want to provide your students to get the opportunity to validate their own work and validate their learning with student agency, that ability to go and learn and write where they want to and not be surveilled or be accused of misconduct inappropriately. And finally, for your educators, where they have the ability to appropriately support and validate the learning behind the degrees, behind that certification that they are giving to the student who has submitted their work. And we wanted to replace that ineffective model of police and punish. So hopefully that makes sense. Anybody who wants to kind of learn more information on, what we've talked about today, either on the research or on the support and validate model, we're open to hearing more about that. And so over to you, Veronika.
Thank you very much, Garnet. Thank you very much, Judyth. It was really inspiring. You gave us like many ideas to think, and also there are some comments in the chat. So with this, I would like to start our Q&A session. We have some minutes left. So if anyone has a question, please raise your hand. And I will use this opportunity to start because I would like to ask Judyth about her thoughts. That sometimes I'm hearing like, oh, when we were studying, it was really hard. We studied many hours and it was not easy for us. So why should we now change and give these young students the advantages and make it easier for them and so on? Because we were stressing out. We had many problems when we were studying and no one cared. So why this needs to be changed now?
They talk about the speed of glacial change in universities. Universities are extraordinarily complex, full of very clever people who are really happy in their own little ecosystem and environment, and that's where they want to stay. The world has changed since I did my degree. The world's changed since you did your degree. I think that we need to have stronger, and I'm now speaking from a university manager, I think that we've got to have a strong emphasis on the continuing learning and education of our lecturers at the same time as we're asking our students to learn. Well, why not have that sort of creativity, that curiosity, and that desire to keep up to date, not only in terms of content, but also in terms of technology and delivery. So I think that our colleagues do have a responsibility to actually keep up with the times.
Thank you, Judyth. Anyone has a question or comment, wants to add something? Yes, Catherine, please.
Hi, thank you very much for this very interesting talk. I'm from Germany and I have a writing center background, so I'm very pleased with the idea of formative feedback throughout the writing process. And when AI started to become so popular, I was very hopeful that this would be a pathway that opens now for educators. But what I experience now in reality is that everyone is saying we don't have the time for that. So the problem is that educators don't see how they can manage to give this formative feedback throughout the way of students writing their tasks. And in the reality we have with much more tasks coming into educators every day, I lack for arguments how to convince them. Do you have any answers for that? And maybe even in the area of AI, I don't know if AI can also help here.
Well, I'll get Garnet to also check in with this as well. But one of the services that Studiosity offers, and we don't have people in Germany because it's an English language platform, but it is immediate feedback. And we have this enormous data lake and students get feedback. Originally, when we started out, the feedback was actually by people, and it would be, 2,000 word essay. Probably students would get feedback within 24 hours, and it was detailed feedback and it was useful feedback. And importantly, it was help, not answers. So, and the reason I work for this company is that view that it's help, not answers. And so students actually learn, they get positive, productive feedback to help them improve the quality of their writing. With the implementation of AI, students can submit the same essay and get feedback within less than a minute. And the feedback is both detailed and it's about higher order skills, it's about critical thinking, it's about structure, it's not necessarily about the accuracy of the content, but about the ability to improve the structure of your writing, providing evidence to support claims. And so the feedback is actually detailed. Garnet, do you want to make an addition to that?
No, I think you've contextualized that very well, Judyth. I mean, that was part of my presentation when I talked about support and validate. The support part of that was the feedback part of what Judyth has just explained. And, yeah, I think you did a great job of summarizing that. So I don't think I have much more to add.
So do I understand it right that the feedback is AI generated?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think, yeah, the students as part of that process have ability to submit a draft and get feedback around all those elements that I talked about, as far as things like the grammar structure, the critical thinking skills, and the whole thing here is that even though it's AI, the AI is based off of 20 years of research that we have been doing this process from humans' feedback. Okay, so this is not like we're putting a wrapper around one of the LLMs and going, oh, we're putting guardrails on an LLM to give feedback, because we feel that our solution is based in education and educational pedagogy and research. And so that's where we feel that there's a bit of a differentiator in how we do this. So that's an important thing to kind of call out.
Okay, thank you very much.
No problem.
So thank you everyone for being here. Thank you, Judyth and Garnet, for such an insightful start of this series. And as we close this first session, I really want to remind everyone that this is just the beginning for us, because over the next few months, we will continue this journey with some student-led panel and structured debate and also practical workshop. And our goal is really to move the discussion into the action and eventually also creating Wellbeing and Integrity Handbook, which will serve serve as a legacy for our community. And I also want to again thank Evelyn and Andrea once more to help with the organization of this series and also today's event. For ENAI, it's really important that we opened this discussion and that we will also continue working on well-being. And we are really grateful for the collaboration with Studiosity, since they have such a robust insights and data, and they are really doing deep research about this important topic. I put in the chat the link to the Wellbeing series. You are more than welcome to follow us. Also, you can submit your email over there, so you will get all the information and news in your mailbox. And also, I put my contact over there. If anyone is interested in joining us, maybe being part of the panel, being part of the Wellbeing series, you are more than welcome to join, and I would be happy to discuss this further with each one of you. So thank you very much for being here, and have a lovely day.